Hi there. Today we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is writing sentences. Now, my students should already have mastered how to write a sentence, but we all know that that's not always the case, even when they get into the older grades. So, this is specifically going to be about how to teach students in an intervention how to write a complete sentence. So, this may not be all of your students who need this, maybe there's just a few of them. So you could use this activity in small group, or if you need to work whole group, you can as well. Make sure that you stick around until the end because I'm going to tell you exactly how to get this intervention unit and also get access to other intervention units, because it's very important to have a library of resources you can use when your students struggle with things that are below grade level. We all know our students are not at grade level for every single writing skill, so this is super important to use in your classroom. So when would you actually use a sentence writing intervention? You would use this if your students are really struggling with writing a complete sentence. So if your students write in fragments and run on sentences, or they can't finish a complete sentence, this can be a really great intervention to use with them. So they might actually have the sentence structure down. They just don't know how to use it properly. So we're working with those types of students, and this video isn't really geared towards teaching this skill to students who are kindergartners or first graders who are really learning to put a sentence together. So this is definitely a reteach skill that we're talking about. Well, the first lesson we want to start with these students is just a review of what the parts of a sentence are. So we can break this down into two very simple parts, which is subject and predicate. We will look at examples of sentences in picture books, any mentor text that we have. You can even use your curriculum. You can use any sort of textbook you have. Anywhere that has sentences, you can use as an example. But I want to actually teach this by color coding the two simple parts of a sentence. So in this case, we're talking about the subject and the predicate. Now, in this activity, I want to show my students that the subject is the who or what that the sentence is about, and the predicate is what the subject does or is, and this starts with or contains a verb. So if you notice that you're giving this lesson and your students don't know what a verb is, you can definitely back up and talk to them about that as well. Now, in this lesson, we are color coding using blue for the subject and yellow for the predicate, but you can use any color that you want. This is great because it's a visual so that your students can see the two different parts. They can also see the punctuation, the capitalization. You want to review that as well. You also want to introduce them to this checklist that says, check to make sure your sentence, and then it has 4 items, has subject and predicate, begins with a capital letter, ends with correct punctuation, and makes sense. So these are things that are going to help your students when they're actually writing sentences within their own writing. So I would keep this checklist front of mind, whether it's in the front of their folder for writing, a binder if you have it, or just somewhere on a board where they can see it. I like to keep all of my intervention materials on a bulletin board that's behind my small group area. And that way, if students want to come find a resource that we've learned, that we've used in a small group time, they can go back and they know exactly where to find it. So you can also make a copy of this and just cut out the checklist for these students once they're done with this intervention or they've done with this reteach lesson, and they can take that back into their own writing. Because remember, the most important thing is the application of this skill that they've learned or been retaught. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to practice this. So we're going to look at sentences and we're going to color code the subject and the predicate. And we are going to do that with the same color coding over and over and over again. We can start whole group. We can then have them work in groups, then work in partners and work individually. You can split these 12 sentences up. You can do additional sentences. You can pull sentences from books. Whatever you want to do, just consistently practice it. And that way they get a chance to understand how the highlighting works, what the different parts of a sentence are. You can also even have them underline the capital letters. You can have them circle the punctuation. Any parts of an element of a sentence should be marked. The next step is to take these sentences and be able to look at them and figure out which ones are real sentences, complete sentences, and which ones are not complete sentences. So what I do is a simple sort, which is a great hands-on way for students to practice this. And we'll look at these ones are complete sentences and these ones are incomplete. And when they're done sorting, it's not just sort and check, it's discuss. Why is this one a complete sentence? Okay, great. Why is this an incomplete sentence? Cool. Now, how can we make it a complete sentence? So that gives you some practice of application of the actual sentence writing so your students can work to create a full sentence from an incomplete sentence. Now, another issue that we have is students can write what seems to be a complete sentence, but it's so jarbled, it just doesn't make sense. So, and this is something where they could have a subject and a predicate, but it still doesn't make sense. So we need to add this part. So in our fourth lesson, we're gonna work on an activity where we mark if a sentence makes sense or doesn't make sense. Now, this activity should come along with discussion. So whether it's whole group discussion, small group discussion, or partner discussion, your students should be discussing why something makes sense or why it doesn't. And if it doesn't make sense, that's another opportunity for students to fix it to make it make sense. So one example would be, I couldn't at the store. That's our first one, doesn't make sense. So what could they change that to make it make sense? They could change it to, I couldn't find my wallet at the store, or I couldn't find oranges at the store. So super simple correction. We can also have them label the subject and the predicate with their color coding, underline the capital letter, also put the punctuation circled, and that way they're continually practicing what we've been teaching them about all the parts of a complete sentence. Now, those 4 lessons are pretty good and usually enough to reteach and then support students with those materials to actually practice it in their writing and continue to remind them of how to write a complete sentence. However, some people do like to go further into these lessons, especially if you have students who are spending an extended period of time with you, whether it's in a resource classroom or you're working in small group, or if you just have some students who still don't have it. So you can keep going with some additional lessons. So the next lesson that you can do is called Missing Pieces. And this activity allows for students to figure out, not only identify what a subject and a predicate is, but figure out what's missing and put that into their own writing. So this is also great practice. Activity number 6 is called Cross It Off, and this is my favorite. And I have to say, if you don't use this activity, but you are going to do revision with your students during your regular writing unit, you should do one that's similar to this. And this is where students actually look at a paragraph and they're able to look for which one is not a complete sentence. So this allows them to use their brains to analyze a piece of writing that might be almost completely done properly, but there's one incomplete sentence. Fix that, and then their paragraph is awesome. So this is something we do in their own writing, and I want to remind them of, because students they just write and they might do more complete sentences than incomplete, but we want them to be able to analyze their writing and fix those incomplete sentences. So I really love this activity for that. The last activity I have is a word bank, which helps them build a sentence. And this can be really helpful for your English language learners, especially because this gives them some subjects and predicates to put together. It also gives them some extra bonus phrases. So you don't have to do this last or as a separate activity. If you have students who are English language learners or they're just struggling in general, and maybe you're on lesson 2 or 3, you can bring in this word bank to help them write sentences. You can also use this in their own writing. Now, you might not be able to use these exact examples depending on what your topic is, but you can actually make a word bank like this for your students that has to do with the topic that they're writing about. So you can use this type of activity within your own writing block to support your English language learners or any students who are just struggling to build a sentence in general. Now, if you love these lessons, you don't want to have to recreate them yourselves, check the link in the description. I'm going to tell you exactly where I have my intervention library. And I'm also going to link to a free training that you can take to help you learn how to engage all of your writers. So one of the things that I think is most important in writing instruction is that we have consistent time for our students to learn about writing and apply that information. So apply the grammar, apply these intervention units. All of this is so important if your students are going to grow as writers. And in so many classrooms, we don't have time for writing instruction. We don't have the curriculum for writing instruction. So that training is going to address it. It's going to go really in depth. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you learned a lot about reteaching sentence writing to your students, because I know your struggling writers will definitely need this. And so please let me know in the comments what questions you still have about teaching writing. And if I see one that I haven't made a video on yet, I might make a future video on it. All right, thank you so much, and head over to the next video to learn more about writing instruction.